Live. All right, we are streaming on YouTube now. Now I'm just going to do one other thing that everybody can access. So if you got the email earlier, so you have the source sheet. I'm also going to share it on the screen. Though what I'm going to do, this is what I do when I teach my high school classes. I'm actually going to sign in from my other device. This way I can see people while I teach. One screen will be devoted to seeing you. So one more moment here. Sorry for the delay. All right. And go. All right. Okay, so
Uh-oh.
hold on, sorry. That solved the problem. Okay, let me turn the other video off. And let's, okay, you should now see on your screen the source sheets for this evening. So please, feel free at any point, by the way, always ask questions, unmute yourself. We're a small, relatively small group, so I love the participation. All right, here we go. Last time, 2 weeks ago when we met, we began Tehillim Tzavi Zayin. I believe we did the first two psukim. I even checked that on the video from last time just to make sure where we ended. So we'll just quickly review what we had said up until that point. We had the psalm began, Hashem malach haaretz yismuchu rabim, that God is king, and the earth, the world shall rejoice, the land shall rejoice. Yismuchu rabim, and even the islands, which we talked about, were the far out places where the Jews might be exiled. They shall rejoice because God is king. And we, again, have been exploring two theories at the same time, which is not always easy, by the way, to study two parallel theories which are not in agreement about how to understand a text. But according to the one that the Radak, or the Mahalech, the path that the Radak is taking in explaining this section of Tehillim, is that we're talking about a time that in the future there'll be Mashiach. And so why is God king? I mean, why is it start like that? Because the world acknowledges God is king. Not that God needs that. God doesn't need anyone to tell him that he's the king, but we all, as the world, now acknowledge that and recognize that. And even, those who are far off in the islands, they also get this. In the other path that we were taking, which was following in what Amos Chacham was saying, he took the path here that we're talking about, again, people who are coming to the Mikdash, to the temple, to come before God, to bring korbanot of thanksgiving. Partly that proof is because in Psalm 100 it's Mizmor LeTodah, and so this is all a lead up to the psalm that talks about the thanksgiving offering. And so we have here people who are encountering God in a very close way in the Beit HaMikdash. And their feeling right now as they are here is that the world should be, this is a place the world should be rejoicing. And even the far off places should be, there's reason for them as well to be celebrating, even though they're not here with us right now. That's that kind of exalted feeling that they have about God right now in this moment. The second pasuk that we saw, Anan v'rafel sivat tzedek mishpat nachon kiso, that this dense, thick cloud, that these dense, thick clouds are surrounding God, and tzedek u'mishpat mechon kiso, righteousness and justice are the basis of God's throne. And this is a really this theme about God's throne and God's attribute of tzedek and mishpat, of righteousness and justice, will appear once again later on in this psalm. Hopefully we get to it tonight. And as we've seen already, we saw in the previous psalm, Psalm 96, this is a common theme, that God's tzedakah and mishpat, God's righteousness and justice, is something that is at the core of what we celebrate, about sort of seeing and being and what we see when we encounter the Shekhinah and when we encounter God in this world. The thing that really touches touches us, hopefully, and certainly David HaMelech or whoever, as the Gemara says, that there are a few others who authored some parts of Tehillim. This touched the person who wrote this, and so. We should always think about that. It's a very common theme also in Nevi'im, God's tzedek and mishpat, and I think I made the claim in other contexts in teaching here at Young Israel Scarsdale. This goes back to Avraham. This was what attracted God to Avraham. That's what he says when he's right before the destruction of Sodom. He says that this is what makes Avraham special. He particularly talked about God, following in God's ways, and particularly in tzedek and mishpat. Okay, so that's what we had gotten to last time, at least according to the recording from last time. So let's pick up from there with Pasuk Gimel. Okay, or unless there's any questions, by the way, before we jump into. Before we jump into anything, you can always, let me just see if I have a chat in the chat box. Oh, thank you. Yes. Tu B'Shvat Sameach. I think Alan pointed out, yes. Everyone should have a wonderful Tu B'Shvat. I didn't eat any fruit yet. I should go eat some fruit. Okay. Gimel. Pasuk Gimel. Eish lefanav telech utlahet saviv tzarav. So we have again this image now of the dense clouds. We talked about, and both Amos Chacham and I think the Radak as well spoke about this is, well, no, most Chacham talk about this is like God's clothing. This is how, in the image of Har Sinai, when the Jewish people are receiving the Torah, God appears, and it's a whole to do that morning of revelation and smoke and the thunder and the lightning, the whole thing. This is how God sort of appears. Now, so this is just simply a description of God's, as he puts it, again, God's clothing. God's, this is how the big day malchuto. These are his, his how he looks on the throne. It's filled with smoke and whatever. And the Radak had said, no, that was that darkness, that cloud was there to kind of blot out the Rishaim. And what the president was referring to. Hold on, I'm just getting a little bit of an echo feedback here. Somebody's there we go. And the Radak took the approach that, as I said, that this is to block out the Rishaim so that the tzedek and mishpat can kind of rule the day. The righteousness and justice can rule the day. Okay, so that Pasuk Gimel says, Eish lefanav telech, fire, Eish lefanav telech, before him, before God, is going. There's fire that is going in front of God. Okay, we'll unpack all this in a second. Utelahet saviv tzarav, and to lahate is like to be like a burned, like it's to be burned. Utelahet saviv tzarav, and the burning, he burns those those enemies, the tzarav, the foes that are around him. So we have here Again, fire is going in front of God, and the enemies, the foes of God, are getting burned by God. What does this mean? What is the imagery here supposed to be teaching us? So the commentary of the writings of Amos Chacham, he writes, "Kan hu mitaer et mar'eh masa'o shel Hashem." This is how God travels, right? If you were to imagine God traveling, I'm not saying God travels, but how would you picture it? How would you try to describe it? So he says this, what's happening here? Again, the one who is reciting this is trying to, he knows that this is not how God actually travels, but he's trying to use human terms to explain attributes that how we can relate to God. And he says, "Shu noseh el hamedina hamamlicha oto ve'over betocha b'tahalucha chagigit." What's happening here? This is a big celebration, right? The fires and the smoke in the previous pasuk. So this is like, how does God present himself, right? Like any king would. It would be a big show, right? We watched last week, 1 week ago, inauguration of a president of the United States. And yes, it was COVID, so it was, things were tamped down. But every 4 years, whenever there's an inauguration, it's a big party, and then they go down Pennsylvania Avenue, and it's a whole celebration, and no surprise. And you go to any country where they, the new leader elected, or certainly there's you go back to times of different monarchies, it would not have been surprising that there was a big chagiga, a big celebration of how the king arrives. What usually happens, and again, this happens every time there's a presidential inauguration, for example, they clear the path, right? They want to make sure everything is clear. How do you clear the path? Well, and he even writes here, particularly to do away with those who are the enemies of this king, they go in front and they kind of burn and they singe all the those who are trying to cause trouble and who are against the king. So that's why they're going V'lifnei Hashem eish holechet, before God. The fire is going in front, trying to burn those who are trying to stop the kingship of God from taking hold in the world. And that's the image that he sees here. But the Radak takes a different approach, right? So you're getting rid of the enemies here, right? So that God is much more noticeable. But the Radak, take a look, I'm scrolling down here on this source sheet. I'll make it even bigger, actually. I can do that. And let's see, we got.
If you want to do the Defense Production Act to make another company make more vaccines,
somebody's volume is on, and you might want to turn it off. I definitely hear some.
Maybe just mute everybody.
Here, let me do that. Maybe that's the best way to do it. And you can always feel free to unmute yourself. This is not a don't unmute yourself thing. I'm even leaving that function on. Anyways, so if you take a look. Right over here. Sorry, there we go. Okay. What does the Radak say? He says, "Vitam utlahet saviv." What is going on here with this burning of those around? Shelo ye makom latzeit min ha'esh. Here he's saying there's no escaping the fire. Right, that's why they're surrounded and getting burned by this, because there's no place to hide from it. Now, again, the Radak's world of Mashiach here, what's happening? Those who have opposed God and have stood in contrast to the values of God have nowhere to hide now. God, in the time of Mashiach, his presence is that much more felt. And essentially what they stood for is all these enemies and foes is getting burned. Right? It's going to cease to exist. Okay, so again, keeping these two worlds in mind as we study this text. Okay, let's go back. Now we are over here, Pasuk Daled.
Oh, I want to say something.
Yes, please, Carol, go ahead.
Just that it reminds me a little, it's more intense, but it reminds me of the pillar of fire and the cloud in the Midbar.
Absolutely. I think it's not, I should have mentioned that. Thank you. It's not surprising at all that God here is being manifest, or at least what's going in front of God is an Aish. Because the Aish, as Carol points out, that was one of the, and the Anan in Pasuk Bet, but these were the two features which God as he shepherded the Jewish people through the desert. These were the two things that protected them from the problems of the desert, the snakes and the scorpions and whatever else was problematic. God cleared the path. Same idea here. Excellent point, Carol. Really, really fascinating. By the way, Carol was, you just reminded me. So I happened to notice today on Safaria, Carol, I think it's important to point this out here. Let me go over here. I'm just going to go back to the homepage of Safari. I feel like we should all just appreciate this. I think I saw this today somewhere. I think I saw it the Learning Today on Safari was sponsored.
Oh, it's my mom.
In memory of your mother, Yishamashev and Aliyah. And I saw it when I was preparing something today. Now I can't find it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it only appears when you first go on Safari or something on one particular page.
But it was it made me happy to see it. So anyway, so thank you for helping Safaria, who helps all of us every week with this source sheets. Okay, Pasuk Daled. Heiru v'rakav tevel, ra'ata v'tachel haaretz. So what's going on here? Again, think about all this fire and smoke and whatnot. Now here we go, right? Now we're talking about lightning. God's lightning, heiru b'rakav tevel. The world is lit up with his lightning, with God's lightning. Ra'ata, the world sees this. I'm already skipping to the word aretz. The land sees this. Vatachel, right? And it is shaking. Right, it is shaking almost, as I would say, out of fear of seeing the lightning of God, and the world is shaking. Amos Chacham, he explains here, Habarakim asher Hashem sholeach meirim et tevel, et haaretz. Tevel is another word for aretz, for the land. That the lightning that God sends lights up the world. Now we know this is from a just living, just life experience. We all know that lightning does, cause a momentary flash of light. But what does this mean that it lights up the world? Like what is trying to be conveyed here? So habrakim hayotzim min ha'ananim mitorim beloshon hapiyut ki'ilu heim chitzim sheHashem sholech be'oivav. Amos Chacham sees this as arrows that come out of those clouds, right? It does conjure up that imagery. It's a bolt of light, and it's almost like it's coming out of the thick cloud and like an arrow being shot out of the bow. That's the imagery that he sees here. V'gam kadei laha'ir k'vayachol et darko. And it is lighting up his path as he is coming. Right? This is the king who's arriving, right? Who's, going on a particular path through the country. What's happening? They're clearing the path. God's, lighting up the path with his lightning. And so this, again, speaks to very much the show of a king. Right? And I don't mean show in a bad way, like he's trying to make a particular entrance, but they're using an example here that human beings can understand, which is that God's presence is here. It's coming. And it is coming along with all of these natural phenomena, but not happening in such a natural way. And there's something special about this. Okay. Okay, yeah. So we talked about the lightning, which is related to the Aish. Okay, and let's take a look here at the Radak now. Radak is right over here now on your screen. Heiru kolomar shiu mishpat. Now this is very interesting. He takes, whereas Amos Chacham took a very, like this is still painting a picture of, the earth, by the way, the earth is trembling, right? and he talks about how it's like there's ra'ash from the lightning, right? If you ever had lightning strike not too far away from your house, it can make a large cracking sound. And imagine also the ground is shaking. Ra'ash ha'adama, right? If I've never lived through an earthquake, not true actually. I was in New York when they had that earthquake. Definitely in the late 2000s. I don't remember exactly when it was here, but I didn't feel it, so I don't actually recall the feeling. But if those who have heard the accounts of those who have been through an earthquake, there's almost like, I guess, a sound to the little bit of the shaking, maybe because everything is shaking. The house is shaking and everything, the objects are shaking. So there's a sound, and it's almost like the sound of trembling because God's presence is on his way. But the Radak takes this in a very different way. He says, He'iru, right, that the lightning brings light to the world. What is this? Kolomar shiu mishpatav nir'im lecho. What is being illuminated? It is God's mishpat. It's God's justice, which relates to what we were just talking about a moment ago. Tzedek u'mishpat mechon kiso. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of God's throne. And the Radak is pointing out here what is being illuminated? What are people experiencing? It's God's mishpat. It's God's justice in the world. That God is bringing about a more just world now in the times of Mashiach for everybody. Kamosha Amar Eish v'Gofrit Amtir Alav Ve'al Agafav. That you have fire and sulfur, raining down, and Agafav is like large hail. Lefichach, and because of these things. The earth sees this and it is trembling and shaking. So you could say this is the earth reacting to God's mishpat. Everything is kind of getting shaken out here. The wicked are suffering perhaps for not having stood up for the values of tzedek and mishpat, of righteousness and justice. And if you think about it, go back to Pasuk Aleph, the world is also part of the world is actually rejoicing about the fact that God's mishpat, God's justice, is coming through finally. So that's one way you could interpret it. The Radak gives you a second way. Or you could say, which is more along the lines of what most Chacham said, it's sort of, take it as it is. The fire is sort of raining down on I presume here, those who are wicked. And these bolts of lightning are great and they're constant until basically everybody is shaking in their boots, all the nations of the world, right? And so the shaking of the world, Ritzono Lomar, Yoshvei Haaretz. We're talking about the people, not literally the land, but the people in the world, the Radak says, are shaking because they are in awe of what God is sort of doing. Again, think in the world of Mashiach here, things are happening, the world is a-changing, and this causes a stir to the other nations of the world who are now a little bit fearful of what's happening with this change. Okay. Comments, questions, thoughts here as we continue? We're going to see basically the next number of psukim really kind of develop. It's a kind of the same theme over and over. So this imagery, while it will change from pasuk to pasuk, the idea here is going to stay pretty consistent. Okay, Harim kadonag namasu milifnei Hashem milifnei Adon kol haaretz. So now, right, we've talked about things that are happening in the sky. We've talked about lightning. We talked about clouds. We've talked about fire. Okay, I guess that doesn't naturally occur just from the sky. And we've talked about the earth trembling and shaking. Now let's talk about the mountains, which we've seen in the previous paragraph of Tehillim. We saw different parts of the world, of the natural world, are being described. Now what do we have? The mountains. Harim kadonag namasu. So I have to look up what is the word kadonag. So everybody says this, and our Radak says it very plainly and simply. Hu hashava. This is wax. Shava is wax, by the way. Amos Chacham says the same thing. There are a lot of hard words sometimes in Tehillim. And just to go look them up, you have to look them up. So the mountains are melting. Namas is to melt. They're melting. They're melting like wax. Okay. Harim kadonag namasu milifnei Hashem, from before God. The mountains are melting like wax before God. Milifnei Adon kol aretz. And here you're going to have a very poetic thing, which we've seen. Milifnei Hashem, and then we repeat the theme from before God, from before the master of the world, of the land, which is God. So we had that before, where you have that sometimes the doubling. Okay, let's see. I see Alan wrote me a message. Morphix says beeswax. Morphix. What does that? Morphix says beeswax. Okay, fine. So it's specifically beeswax. Okay, very good. So we have this melting beeswax, we'll say. Also, we'll just go with wax. I don't think I ever could see Alan's message to me. We'll go with wax here. The mountains are melting like wax from before God. Now it's important here that it says milifnei Adon kol haaretz. Okay, before the Adon of the whole land. Let's look at the Radak here for a second. Once we looked at him before. What are the harim? What do they represent? It's an image of something. He says, "Hu mashal al malchei harishaim." Those who are the wicked kings of the world, wicked kingdoms. Maybe you'll say al malchei rishaim. I shouldn't have said maybe kings. You could say kingdoms of the rishaim, of those who are wicked. And those mountains, those wicked kingdoms, are melting. They're no longer quite as powerful as they were before. This time where God is sort of asserting himself a little bit more now in the world, as sort of ushering in a Mashiach is going on. Okay, so that's how the Radak sees this. He says the Harim are representative of the Rishaim, which is really thematically makes sense. We see the world is trembling, the world is scared. The Tsarav are being burned. These enemies are being burned. It wouldn't be a crazy thing to say that the Harim here represent the evil kingdoms that are out there. Amos Chacham, in this, he says, what are they melting from, first of all? They're melting from the fire, right? Shenames me'esh. And what else is causing them? What else is causing the mountains to melt? It's also Asher names mi'irato mipnei Hashem. They are now in awe of God. And again, Amos Chacham's not working in the world of Mashiach here, but the idea being is that the people who are super inspired right now in the Mikdash are thinking, and they're being told here, that the world will sort of one day get this, and they'll understand what it's like to feel like you're in awe of God. And that those who are maybe haughty, represented by a mountain, could be the Malchei Rishaim of the world. One day they will understand what it means to have yira of God, of being in awe of God, and this will ultimately melt that mountain, whatever that mountain represents exactly, but probably something that is, like the Radak says, something evil and something that is keneged, that is against the ways of God. Okay.
I want to make I'm sorry, I keep making comments, but.
Okay, of course, jump in.
I think it's even more, to me, it's even more powerful if we view it naturalistically. Like, to me, it's almost like a Salvador Dali, like the something of time or something, where everything's like melting. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think this sense of like the power of God, this kind of, there's just this surreal image, or I don't know about the Christian view of the end of days really much, but
right.
A lot of this, like, kind of, I'm wondering if they get some of their stuff from here, like where, it's more than even just topsy-turvy. It's all these like these powerful natural images kind of like taking over in ways that don't fit our categories, aren't
right.
colored in lines. And it's like this amazing thing that's beyond. I find that even more powerful.
Yeah. No, I understand. And I think, by the way, so the Amos Chacham points out at the end of this pasuk, to just dovetail what you said, right? Why is it to repeat before God, before Adon Kol Aretz? Why is the world melting, or the mountains are melting before God? Because God is in control of everything. And that's why all these fantastic changes are happening, right? That again, as Carol was saying, we can't fit it in a box in our head because we never pictured this before, because we can't picture it because we never lived through anything that's something even close to this. Right. Excellent. Yeah, it's a good point. Excellent. Okay, let's keep going. Pasuk Vav. Higidu hashamayim sidko v'ra'u chol ha'amim kivodo. That the heavens are going to, now look what they're proclaiming here. Look, what are the heavens telling us about? Sidko. They're telling us about his righteousness. Look what heavens didn't proclaim that the Ribono Shel Olam, he eats matzah on the 15th of Nisan. They didn't proclaim that he lights the Hanukkah candles on the 25th of Kislev. What is the thing that is going to stand out that the heavens are going to say when they're talking to you? As it were, again, to quote Carol, like, we can't put this in a box. I don't know what that means. What does it mean that the heavens are telling us something? But they're going to speak about God's righteousness. Right? The idea of equity, of fairness in the world. V'ra'u chol ha'amim kevodo. And all of the nations of the world will see his glory. What glory are they seeing? They're seeing the glory of justice and righteousness, of God's fairness in the world. This is what stands out to the world when they see God. Right? And this is what, remember, if you're working with Amos Chacham's thinking here, this is what the Jewish people who are in the Mikdash, this is what they hope the world will sort of one day see, right? Let's hope that they will see one day that the heavens are going to speak about God's righteousness. And he writes here, Hashamayim me'idim ki Hashem melech tzadiku. God is a righteous king, right? This is the ways of the Torah are supposed to be. They're supposed to be right about fairness and righteousness and justice. And Lamala Mikain Amar, right before this, we said Hashem hu Adon kol haaretz. And now God is master of the whole world. And now we're adding Sh'af Hashamayim modim b'malchuto shel Hashem. And even the heavens are acknowledging the kingship of God. Ve'efshar shakaval haniflaot hanirot b'Hashamayim. And perhaps this really speaks to the wonders that people see in the heavens, right? That they see the kochavim b'mesilotam, that the stars are sort of going along their path that they're supposed to go to. They see the rain is falling, he writes here, from the sky. That these niflaot, these wonders, they are nirot l'chol hamim. They are able to be seen by all the nations. And if you really are able to view the world in such a way, let's say, he doesn't say this, but maybe perhaps I think he means here, God is able to bring rain, which can be a real bracha, a real source of blessing for nations out there in the world. And if they're able to sort of open their eyes and see the bracha and sort of how God is there to help, then they'll see God as a God who is a tzaddik, right? God is a righteous God. And when he says "V'ra'u chol hamim kevodo," that all the nations will see his glory, kol hamim ro'im et kevodo u'mevinim, and they'll understand shelefi chvodo ya'ata lo hamelucha. This is sort of what his kingdom is all about. Is about kvodo makbil el tzidko. What's the honor? He says it's related back to the righteousness. That is what God's glory is all about. And they will see this, and they will be thoroughly moved, I guess. Okay. Let's go over to the Radak for a moment. Just scrolling down to the Radak. Over here. Higidu, he writes, Hashamayim v'himtiram avnei chal gavish. Avnei chal gavish. So this is actually from a verse, I believe, in I think it's, I'm forgetting now if it's Yechezkel or Yirmiyahu. Now I'm forgetting. I looked it up earlier. This is a little bit of a take off that, but it's definitely, these are imagine hailstones on steroids, okay? This is like bad hail falling, stones falling from the sky, and they're falling down, and fire is raining down, and gofrit and sulfur is raining down al harishaim. Yagidu tzedek hakel So as this is happening in the previous psukim, we're talking about the wicked are being melted and burned and etc. So the heavens are now telling us about the righteousness of God. Why? Because God is actually at this moment bringing forth justice to those who have been unjust to others in the world. And that's what the heavens are telling us if we pay close attention to all these things that are emerging from the sky: the lightning, the fire, the clouds, the mountains that are being melted by God. Right? These are all things, perhaps by the fire, right, that are speaking to God bringing forth justice in the world. Okay. Comments, thoughts here? All right, let's keep going here. Pasuk Zayin. We are right over here. Yevoshu kol ovdei fesa. Now we have a little bit of a transition here, right? So we hear until now, as Amos Chacham has said, this part really talks about hitgalut malchut Hashem, about the revealing of God's kingdom, right? And now everybody knows it. Everybody sees it, whether it's Mashiach or you're not dealing with Mashiach. This is a hope for the revealing of God's kingship. Now we have, in the next few verses, we have the embarrassment of those who have worshipped idols, false gods, and the joy of those who are Ovdei Hashem, who worship and serve God. And so we see here, Yevoshu kol Ovdei Fesel, that those who worship Fesel as an idol. Those who worship the idols, they are going to be embarrassed. Right? They should be embarrassed. All those who worshipped idols, Hamit Halalim Ba'elilim, who praised false gods. Right? These were just they were idols, or they're not just idols. They could be images. They could be constantly. It could be something that's in the sky. That's not a god, right? This is what they've been praising. They should be embarrassed. Hishtachavulo kol Elokim. Now, how do we read this? Right? It almost sounds like a command of bow down. Sorry, what did you say, Alan?
Should it be Elohim that all those gods, those false gods, will?
Oh, excuse me. Hishtachavulo. Sorry, I don't know why. See, Safaria. I love Safaria. When I changed it from, I wanted to make it so that people could print this without having Shem Hashem, and so there's a feature where you can change it on Safaria, and they change it to Elohim here. But Alan is correct, and I'm sorry I read it incorrectly. Also, Hishtachavu kol Elohim, right? That all these other gods, I should say, hey here, right? All those other gods will bow down to him, will bow down to God, to the real God, right? Hishtachavulo, they bow down to him, all these gods. Now, it's important for the grammatical, those grammatically inclined, you might say, well, there's something a little bit off here about the hishtachavu here. We'll skip ahead for a moment. The comment here where my little hand is pointing, Einot sivui, this hishtachavu, you could have read it as bow down to him, you gods. It's not Einot sivui. El avar b'makom ati. This is not a command. Hishtachavu. This is lashon avar. This is like a past tense. Hamishamesh al teira pe'ula nimshechet. Amos Chacham writes. It's related to the action, right? That comes afterwards. So Yishtachavu lo kol Elohim. This just simply means they should bow down. That they have bowed down to him, right? They have bowed down to him. Okay, I believe that's how you would understand this. But let's read the Radak in full. Maybe that'll be a lot clearer. Yevoshu. What about this piece about the embarrassment factor? V'az yevoshu kol ovdei fesa. Now, after all these things have happened, and the mountains are melting, and everything is going wrong for the Rishayim, so those who have been following the ways of, idolatry are going to be embarrassed. Shayu mithalim umishtabchim ba'elilim. What have they been doing? They've been praising and lauding idols. nothingness. V'hayu omrim, and they were saying, Ki hatzlachatam haita ha'elim. How were they having all this success all this time? Because they thought the idols were working, their gods were working. Shayu avdim, that they worship these gods. V'ata, and now kishayishbatem ke'alit barach. Now they're being judged. Now God's mishpat is coming through. Yiru v'yedu, they see and they now understand ki ein mamash bahem. Really, they're nothing. Ve'ein hayachol bilti la la'avdo. Without God, they could do nothing. Right? Meaning, without God, all these things couldn't have happened. They maybe thought it was the idol. They thought it was the false god. Turns out now they see really who's in charge, and they have embarrassment. Interesting to point out, we are in these parshiot now. Paro actually, I think, fails. I think he fails at this. He fails at feeling embarrassed. He does not want to admit that he does not want to admit that the God of the Hebrews is as powerful as, I think inside he kind of knows how powerful he is. And his inability to acknowledge that embarrassment, which would reflect poorly on him in his mind towards the people, is what perhaps caused him to continue on with all these plagues one after the other. Even once you get to the fifth, then you could say, okay, God hardened his heart, whatever that means. But this is a part of understanding and correcting a mistake, is that you're embarrassed by what happened. And power really takes a long time to really come around and acknowledge the power of God, at least publicly. V'ha'pesel v'ha'el v'ha'elilim heim tzurot she'osim al tchunat tzva ha'shamayim ve'ovdim otam. Who's the pesel? Who is the idol and the gods, these false gods? These are images that are made that reflect the things that you can see in the sky. People we know worshipped the sun and viewed the sun as a god. That may be the whole pshat. That may be the whole explanation behind the makkah of choshech, of darkness in Egypt, was that this was God showing, I could block out one of your gods, the sun god. So the idea of people having made images of the sun and the stars and certain constellations, whatever they worship, they made pictures of it, right? And we know from the Gemara, and actually from the Torah, these are prohibited for Jews to engage in. And perhaps even if it's not for idolatrous purposes, sometimes it can even be problematic. It's not a halacha class, so I can't get into that. But they would worship, these people were worshiping these images on the walls that they had of the sun, or let's say. And now let's talk about this. Hishtachavu lo kol Elohim. They also changed it here, Sefaria, right? Elohim, right? Haim tzeva hashamayim. We're talking again here about the legions in the heavens, the sun, the stars, the moon, etc. Shehem na'avdim, and they were worshipped. These are worshipped images. Heim yodu, they admit v'hishtachavu l'Hashem. They bow down to God, right? Ki asa mishpat be'ovdehem. Because, right? Why are they bowing down? Because now God has sort of brought down the hammer on those who have been worshiping these images. And so because those who have worshipped the, let's say, sun, the stars, the moon, understand now that what they've been doing is wrong, no one's left to worship them, and they are ultimately, the image here being that they are bowing down to God and understanding that they're not real gods. They bow down to God. And that's what he explains here. Hishtachavu einot tzivu. You're not talking about a command here. We're talking about something that they do, right? They bow down to God, right? Why are they bowing down? Because nobody's worshiping them, essentially. You could explain, he wants to explain here, the perush of Elohim, right? Kol Elohim, kol ovdei Elohim acherim. Maybe it's talking about all of the worshipers of the other gods, right? They are bowing down now to God. They realize the truth about God. You could read it that way. Radak lays out both possibilities. The ovdei, what is Ovdei from this pasuk? Sorry, Ovdei. Right. Sorry. Where was that in the pasuk? Hold on. Ovdei shezachar omed b'makom shnayim. Oh, okay. So Ovdei. This really goes back to right. Go v'voshu kol Ovdei fesel. Why the plural of the worshippers of the idols? And I think again, there's talking again because they often would worship multiple, right? I think that this was something that was not uncommon, right? They would have multiple gods. So this is all. This is what the Radak here says. Let's go back up. Okay, and let me just take a look here if there was anything I wanted to point out from Amos Chacham's commentary. Okay, I think he really kind of explains it in a very similar way. Yeah, okay. I don't think there's anything here I wanted to make a point of. Okay, but again, for the Radak, if you're talking about a time of Mashiach, this makes a lot of sense. Everybody's kind of veering away from what they were worshiping before and seeing the truth about God. Let's go on to the next pasuk. Chet, Shama v'tismach Tzion, v'tagelna benot Yehuda. Here we're now saying, that Tzion should hear and rejoice. V'tismach. That Tzion, which is Yerushalayim, should rejoice at what's happening. And the daughters of Yehuda, which is the surrounding area of Yerushalayim, that's the area of Yehuda. They are supposed to be also overjoyed and partying and dancing. Leman mishpatecha Hashem. Why are they dancing and so happy? They're because of God's mishpat. Once again, because of God's justice. This is why they're celebrating. Because the world feels like a more just place. Again, if you're talking about Mashiach, so it feels more just because God has, corrected what are maybe the flaws of the world that we see around us. Take a look here. Shama. What are they hearing in Yerushalayim and the cities of Yehuda? Kol habarakim v'haramim. They hear the lightning and the thunder. V'tismach, and they're rejoicing. V'shar ha'am yachilu. And the other nations, V'shar ha'am yachilu l'kol Yisrael, l'kol v'Yisrael yishma'u v'yismachu. The other nations, when they hear these sounds, they are shaking in their boots. And the Jewish people, though, on the other hand, they are rejoicing. Ki yedu ki avnei habarad. They understand that the barad, the stones of the hail that is coming down, and the fire that's coming down, is coming for the mishpat harishayim. Is coming to judge and to bring justice to those to evil. And so this is something that is worthy of celebration. And people who are good people should be happy that there is justice in the world. And again, it's something to celebrate that that maybe those who've also been terrorizing a little bit the Jewish people and Yerushalayim are being pushed away. And a little bit like when the water comes crashing down on the Egyptians, the Jews celebrate this because it means that they are able to live freely and without the harsh realities of servitude in Egypt. Same thing here, right? They may have been, the picture here might be talking about the Jews are under some terrible reign. And now this is correcting that. V'zachar Tzion, and we mentioned here Tzion, Zion, Yerushalayim, Kihu, Rosh Mamlechet Yisrael. That's really sort of the head of the kingdom of Israel is in Yerushalayim. V'od, Kisham Samuch Yeh Mishpat HaRishaim, because actually also close to there is the Mishpat of the Rishaim. Where will the wicked be judged? Be'emek Yehoshaphat, in the valley of Yehoshaphat. Now, does anybody know what that is? The valley of Yehoshaphat? I had to look this up. This is a very obscure reference in Tanakh.
Is that the valley outside the Dung Gate?
What was that?
Is that the valley outside the Dung Gate?
Yes, I believe so. It's on the eastern side, right, of Yerushalayim?
Right.
Yes. Good. So excellent. So I had to look this up. If you go on Wikipedia, Wikipedia is a great source, so you'll find, okay, great. So I found out immediately from Yoel, in the book of Yoel, and I went and looked it up. There's a reference here, actually he quotes it here in English, right? I will gather all the nations, the prophet says, and I bring them down into the valley of Yehoshaphat. Then I will enter into judgment with them there. So you have here this idea of there's this place right outside of Yerushalayim. Actually, you can see it in the map here, right on the right-hand side. Let's see if I can zoom in on that. There's a map here, the historical map of biblical Yerushalayim. And if you look very carefully, if you look very carefully, it's hard to see. I'm sorry, but it is. Where is it here? But it's on, here. It runs along the eastern wall of the city. He describes here. I'm having trouble finding it right now on the map. I saw it earlier. But it's on the eastern part of the city, and this valley is where the Rishaim will be judged according to the prophet Yoel. Yeah, Carol, you wanted to jump in there?
Is that the same area as Gehenna or not? I think it might be in the similar. Edna, do you know?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's actually excellent question. Anybody know that?
I think Gate Ben Hinnom is outside of the Jaffa Gate. As you walk out the Jaffa Gate to the left, I think that's Gate Ben Hinnom.
Really? Oh, I kind of always thought it was.
All right. Well, Bezrat Hashem will all have a chance to go.
Well, Wikipedia didn't mention it, so maybe it isn't.
We'll check it out ourselves when we go after Corona's over. Bezrat Hashem, we can all make that trip. Okay. So anyway, so the wicked will be judged there. Why is Sion, mentioned here? Particularly because that's sort of the area where the Rishaim would be judged. Lefichach zachar gam kem benot Yehuda shehem arei Yehuda. And that's also why the Benot Yehuda are rejoicing and dancing. The daughters of Yehuda are rejoicing because this is all happening in the cities of Judah. That's sort of that area that surrounds Yerushalayim. Okay. So there's something I wanted to mention from here, from Amos Chacham. Yeah, he points out here that this idea of the Asher Shalashon Leman Mishpatecha Hashem Hi HaKriya Shayu Benot Yisrael Benot Yehuda Koreot B'Sha'ah. What were they singing when they were dancing? What were they like? When they were dancing in a circle, what song were they singing? They were singing the song of Leman Mishpatecha Hashem. They were singing the song of justice. That God, that God's bringing about His justice. Shayu Yotzot B'Mechalot HaSimcha VaHagilah. They were bringing out their flutes and their instruments and their dances and whatever. They're going to make a big party here and rejoice because of God's justice. There's something really important to celebrate in that. Which brings us to Pasuk Tet, but I'm cognizant of the time. And so I think what we'll do is we're going to, as we come to Pasuk Tet, it kind of finishes this thought, and we'll do that, and then we'll conclude with the last part of this, which really talks about that those who are Ohavei Hashem, who love God, are obligated to despise evil and wickedness, and to rejoice in God and God's ways. And I think it's really important when we do this to understand, and we will take a look at this. There's a very important passage. I've shared this before in other classes I've given. There's an important story in Brachot about Rabbi Meir and his wife Bruria about this idea of hating evil and wickedness, and the idea being that it is not supposed to be about the people, it is more about the ideas which they stand for, that we should oppose and that we should be speak out against. But so we will talk about that. because I don't want people to walk away from this paragraph thinking that our role is to hate other people. Our job is sinu ra, right? Our job is to hate evil, not to hate certain people. And so we will talk about that, and what we'll also encounter here next week, this pasuk here, Or Zaru Ala Tzadiku Lishrei Lev Simcha, which we say every Friday night, obviously, but we also say this at what anyone know when else we say this at sort of an auspicious time?
Oh, yeah, we say it on Yom Kippur.
At what point, Alan, do we say it on Yom Kippur?
It's Kol Nidre, just before beginning of Kol
Good, right before we say Kol Nidre, right? The Chazal says, Or Zaru Ala Tzadik Lishrei Lev Simcha. Or Zaru. Right, so we've all been to shul at that point. So I wonder if the custom of repeating it over and over again is so that the people who are walking in late are like, okay, I'm there, I caught it, and it's like a little bit of a delaying. I don't know if that's really the real reason for the custom, but we say this at the beginning of Kol Nidre, and so maybe we'll take a little bit of a deviation, think about why is this a verse that was chosen to be in the liturgy at the very beginning of Kol Nidre, and then we'll make, of course, our connection to what is this doing here in Kabbalat Shabbat. I think the connection is, to me, fairly straightforward, as we pointed out about the idea of Shabbat also being a day of righteousness and justice. That's one of the reasons for Shabbat. And so we'll try to tie all of those things back together next week when we continue. Just one note about the timing for next week's class. There's a program at 8:15. So we will do our class at 7:30 and we'll stop at 8. And then there's a program at 8:15 that we're doing jointly with the Hebrew Institute of White Plains. There was an email sent out earlier today regarding that program, which is an interesting program. I highly will recommend.
So who is he? What is it? Just said a name.
Yeah, so he organized. If you remember last year, there was a rabbi. It was right before the pandemic hit. There was a rabbi and a sheikh who came to our community, and they spoke about bringing peace, through religious dialogue, essentially through understanding different things about their religious texts and our religious texts. And this person who's going to be speaking to us used to be a representative in Congress, and this was something that after he finished his time in Washington, that he devoted himself to this, and he has overseen this program that has brought rabbis together along with our colleagues of the Islamic faith, right? So that's what the program is. So I highly recommend it. It's a great follow-up, and he'll talk about a lot about the work that's being done behind the scenes to try to promote peace through religious means between the Israelis and the Palestinians.